G'day, mate. 40 here. So, the International Criminal Court has put forward an indictment against three of Israel's leading politicians, including its prime minister. And I am not outraged, right? I'm not up in arms. I'm not all emotional about it. So, one thing that grabs me about this decision by Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, is that there are all these articles like, why did he do this? Why did he go public with an arrest warrant request for Hamas leaders and Israel leaders? Like, why did he seek Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant? Like, why did he go public with this? Why did he do it? And in not one single article that I read do they point out for his own personal aggrandizement, for his own ego's sake, to make a name for himself, to become famous. All right, he went from someone who was virtually unknown to one of the 10 leading figures in the news this week. And so most people operate in a way that advances their own interests, advances their own standing, particularly in their own eyes and in the eyes of the people who are important to them. So I did a little research on this barrister, and he's not exactly known as a barrister's barrister. All right, he's known as a canny political player, but he's no genius. He's no rocket scientist. He's not going to leave any mark on the field of jurisprudence, right? On his own legal merits, he will just be a nobody except to, a tiny group of people. But by making this bold statement and indicting two of Israel's leaders, he gets to become famous, right? He gets to make a name for himself. And he gets the world's attention, and he gets to feel like he's riding the white horse, all right? That he's riding to the rescue of, some horrible wrongdoing, and maybe he's right, right? I'm not an expert in international law. I do know that international law overall is a pretty weak instrument, so this will have no practical effect. But what it will do is that it will increase a tendency towards isolation of Israel. So it's just another kind of black mark against Israel that you've got these International Criminal Court warrants out for their arrest. And this goes along with growing criticism against Israel on the part of many countries in Europe, including by Israel's staunchest supporter of the major powers, that is Germany. Germany is increasingly critical now of Israel. And why is there so much growing criticism of Israel? Yeah, in part, there are 35,000 dead Palestinians, and any normal person is going to be disturbed by that. But Europe's demographics have changed, right? Europe has absorbed millions of Muslim Arabs from the Middle East, and Europe's leaders feel intimidated by this. They don't want further outbreaks of Islamic terrorism, and so as a sop to the Muslim immigrants who are taking up room in their countries and who are part of the world's most influential religion, right? Islam punches above its weight. And so they don't want Islamic terror. Why don't people talk about innocent Palestinians? Like, why don't people really care about Palestinians? Well, people care about them as a pet. People care about them as a tool. But what self-interested reason would people care about the Palestinians? For example, what are the number one consumer products that you associate with quality and with Palestine? What are the number one technological advancements that you associate with Palestine? What are the number one scientific advancements that you associate with Palestine? What are the most important entrepreneurial advancements that you associate with Palestine? What are the key breakthroughs in any field of science that you associate with Palestine? Right? What are the accomplishments of the Palestinians that are so vital to your life? And you won't be able to name any, just like you can't name any Chinese consumer product that you associate with quality, right? You can't name any product, any gift of the Palestinians to the world. So they're useful as a pet, they're useful as a tool, but I'm no expert in the Palestinians. I'm just wondering, like, what exactly have they created? What have they given the world? What have they produced? What have they innovated? Where have they broken through? What are the important insights, innovations that the Palestinians have given us? Because in Islam, one Muslim is a brother of other Muslims, and as Muslims, we are here to help them. Good on you. Yes, if you are a Muslim, then you should care about Palestinians. They are your brother. And so I would expect Christians to care about the genocide of Christians in the Middle East, right? I'd expect Jews to care about the suffering of Jews around the world. And so I understand why all Muslims would be outraged by the suffering of the Palestinians. And I'd understand why they'd want to do everything they can to help out their brothers. And I think that's absolutely noble. What I'm curious about is, what about the billions of people who don't have any strong inclination either towards the Israel side or to the Palestine side? Like, what is their self-interested reason for caring about the Palestinians? Now, sometimes people undergo such brutal conditions, they're in such brutal circumstances that they are unable to contribute to the world. And I don't believe that the Palestinians are essentially this or essentially that, right? In a different circumstance, we would see different qualities coming from the Palestinians, right? The Palestinians have every reason to feel oppressed and brutalized and desperate, and to be filled with rage against their Jewish oppressors and their Egyptian oppressors. I completely understand that. And so if the Palestinians develop their own state, right, they're already a nation, right, they are a coherent people. If they develop their own state, all right, and they are able, what do you think they'll be able to offer to the world, right? If they cut back on cousin marriage in freer, more prosperous circumstances, I can see their average IQ moving from, say, 82 to possibly 92. But when I look at the overall Sunni Arab world, what exactly are they contributing to humanity, right? They're lucky enough to have oil resources, but what are the scientific breakthroughs coming out of the Sunni Arab world or the Shia Muslim world, right? Where are the technological breakthroughs coming out of the Islamic world? Where are the scientific breakthroughs coming out of the Islamic world? What Islamic nation states would I look to and see, oh my God, I want some of that. I really want to emulate that. I'm no expert in Islam. I'm just wondering, what Islamic nation states would you put forward as examples for people who don't have any strong ideological direction in any way? They're just looking to learn and to grow and to have more prosperity and more of the good things of life. So what Islamic state would you recommend to non-Muslims as something to emulate? I fail to see anything in Islamic civilization that I would want to emulate. It may be there. I'm just not aware of it. And no one else I know is aware of it either. I don't know anyone who doesn't have an ideological commitment to Islam who just talks casually about, wow, I really admire what Islamic civilization has accomplished in the area of medical advancement. I really admire what Islamic civilization is doing with regard to human freedom. Like, which nations have become more Muslim and more free? Name them, right? We've had tens of millions of Muslims immigrating into the West. And so which Western states have received Muslim immigrants and have become more free as a result? Right? I can't think of any. And I'm talking to Muslims in the chat here, and you can't name any either. You can't name a single Islamic nation state that non-Muslims should look to and be filled with envy and want to emulate the fantastic advancements of this particular Islamic state. So overall, the scientific advancement in the Islamic world is minimal. The literary advancements in the Islamic world are minimal. The entrepreneurial advancements in the Islamic world are minimal. The freedom advancements in the Islamic world are non-existing. Every time you have a substantial number of Muslims moving into a first world country so that they become more than 2%, more than 3% of that country becomes less free. It becomes less cohesive. It becomes less trusting. It develops an enormous underclass of immigrants who are taking in a large amount of government welfare, far more than they are contributing in taxation. So which Western nations, which first world nations would you point to and say, wow, they have really been advanced by Muslim immigrants? Like, is England, for example, a more trusting and cohesive and prosperous nation because it has millions of Islamic immigrants, all right? Are they paying more in taxes than they are taking out in social welfare spending? Are they leading the way in taking out new patents? Are they leading the way in scientific advancements? Are they leading the way in the frontiers of human freedom? Right? Yeah, I look to Iran, and I can't see anything in Iran that I would want to emulate. All right? What exactly are the cutting-edge breakthrough scientific advancements that Iran has given the world? Like, which Iranian consumer products do you most associate with quality? Like, what are the fantastic medical advancements that Iran has given the world? What are the breakthrough entrepreneurial perspectives that Iran has given the world? I just can't think of any Islamic state that I would want to emulate. And there may be some. And I can't think of any first world nation that has been made more free and more prosperous, more cohesive, more social trust, right? More upstanding, right? Less dependent on welfare, right? Which first world nation has been substantially advanced by Islamic immigration? I just can't think of any. There may be some. I'm not an expert on this. So please, if you know of first world nations that are more free, more prosperous, more trusting, more cohesive, have less crime, have less welfare dependency as a result of a substantial amount of Islamic immigration, then please bring them to my attention. Like, I'd like to know. From what I see, every time there's a substantial amount of Islamic immigration into the first world, there is increasing welfare dependency. There is less cohesion. There's less social trust. People feel less at ease with their neighbors. The natives feel less and less at ease with those communities that become dominantly Muslim. So social cohesion, social trust is diminished. Freedom is reduced. And from what I see, when you have substantial amounts of Islamic immigration into first world nations, that these immigrants tend to require far more in social welfare spending than they contribute in the tax base. So please correct me where I'm wrong. So let's have a look at the chat. This life is temporary. You have to die. There is a life which you live after dying this world. Right. So I get this. It is a Muslim who cannot make the case in this world for why Islamic immigration is a benefit to any first world nation. This is a Muslim who cannot make the case that there's any Islamic state that a normal person in the first world would look to and go, I want more of that. I want more of that kind of human freedom, that kind of human innovation. I want this kind of technological, scientific, and medical advancements. I want more of what that Islamic state has. So when you can't make a case for how Islam is a good model in this world, then you say, well, I have these theological reasons, all right? In the next world, you'll see that things are going to be much, much better if you just follow the path of Islam. So this life is a test for Muslims. Muslims know that well. It's just a matter of trust, which non-Muslims don't have on afterlife. Right. So when you can't make a case for the superiority of Islamic civilization in this life, when you can't point to any Islamic nations that a non-Muslim is likely to look at and go, wow, I want to emulate that. Boy, I admire that freedom and that advanced level of civilization that they've achieved. Boy, I really wish that my first world nation could have some of that. Right. When you can't name any of that, then, of course, you're going to retreat to making claims that are not empirically verifiable. So, what do we make of these international criminal court prosecutions?
So directly, so profoundly, as he is going after Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Well, I just think what is going on here is that the ICC's move in the wake of the International Court of Justice's move in January just contributes to the damage that is being done to Israel's reputation. And this is damage that is going to last for as far as the eye can see. Enormous damage is being done to Israel here. And at the same time, I think it's fair to say that significant damage is being done to the United States because the United States is joined at the hip with Israel. And as we back Israel at every turn in the face of evidence that shows that Israel is being legitimately charged with these crimes, it does great damage to us, of course, as well as to the Israelis. So this is bad news for both countries.
Here's Karim Khan, the very articulate chief prosecutor, explaining the charges against Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, cut number.
So when you're dealing with some member of an overall very low achieving group and you're just looking for a way to compliment him, then you say, oh, isn't he clean? Isn't he articulate? Because these are really low levels to compliment someone.
Number 9.
On the basis of evidence collected and examined by my office, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the following international crimes committed on the territory of the State of Palestine from at least the 8th of October 2023. The crimes include...
There is no State of Palestine. Right? He's completely delusional.
Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, willfully causing great suffering, serious injury to body or health or...
I haven't seen any evidence of Palestinians who have starved to death. Like, where are the photos of malnutrition? All right. Much of the media is very quick, very eager to publicize the most heinous things that Israel is doing. Where is the evidence that significant numbers of Palestinians are starving to death?
Cruel treatment, willful killing or murder, and intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population, as well as crimes against humanity of extermination and or murder, persecution, and allegations of crimes of committing other inhumane acts.
I noticed two phrases that we haven't heard before in the criminal or judicial context, Professor Mearsheimer. One is extermination, and the other is the State of Palestine. So I put those two gems on the plate for you to address.
Yeah, I was actually shocked to see the word extermination because it raises immediate thoughts of the Holocaust and what the Germans...
Okay, so Israel's defenders point out that Israel's managed to keep the number of civilian casualties way below what is the norm. Right? The norm in this type of urban warfare is 9 civilian dead for every 1 combatant dead. Right? Israelis have reduced that ratio to less than 2 to 1. So compared to any other example that we have in urban warfare, Israel has done far better at reducing civilian casualties. And I haven't seen yet a substantial rejoinder to that. So either that fact is correct or it's false. I'd like to see some evidence. The pro-Israel crowd has been very forward with pointing out that Israel's reduced the ratio of civilian deaths far below what has been done elsewhere, including by the United States in urban warfare. So it should be easy to falsify. It should be easy to invalidate. But where's the evidence that this is false? I mean, I'd be happy to look at it, but why can't the anti-Israel crowd bring forward some evidence to invalidate this very elementary point that compared to other examples of urban warfare, Israel has done a superior job at reducing civilian casualties.
And others did to the Jews during World War II. But the term is not unpacked in the document, as best I can tell. So I'm not sure what he means by extermination. And it's very important to understand.
You know what he means? He means that he wants attention. Look at me, look at me. He's very articulate. He's showy. He's a sharp political player. Right? Not a particularly great barrister, not a particularly keen legal mind. Not going to go down in history for the quality of his legal work, but hey, he's articulate.
In the ICC documentation that came out the other day, there's no talk of genocide. And if you just listen to what Mr. Khan said, you did not hear the word genocide. And of course, the International Court of Justice hearings earlier this year and the report that was issued by the ICJ did talk about possible genocide, but that's not at play here. But there is that word extermination. And of course, you hear about crimes against humanity and so forth and so on.
So there's no clear objective definition of genocide. All right, scholars of genocide fall out with each other over the definition of genocide. I understand why people can make a strong case that Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. And then other people I hear make a very strong case that it's not genocide. So it's not at all clear. It's not at all clear that Israel is committing a substantial amount of war crimes or that its invasion of Gaza itself is a war crime. So Let's just see.
Look, the charges against Israel are straightforward. There is just a huge amount of documentation that supports them. And in a way, the finding of the ICC, this recent finding of the ICC, is not surprising at all. It's stunning to the Israelis and stunning to the Americans because it puts both countries up in bright lights, and it makes it look like they're complicitous in this mass murder or genocide or whatever you want to call it that's taking place in Gaza. So as I said before, this is devastating for Israel, and it is hugely damaging for the United States as well. Now,
so I think scrutiny is a good thing, right? Accurate criticism is a good thing. So I have no problem with scrutinizing Israel over its conduct of the war in Gaza. It certainly made many mistakes. And I welcome this scrutiny from the International Criminal Court, right? Israel should have to defend itself, and that's good, right? We should think about, how does my behavior, how do my actions, how does the rhetoric in my in-group, how does it play before people who don't have a strong perspective one way or the other?
with regard to your second point, what exactly was the issue there?
He referred to the crimes as occurring in, quote, the state of Palestine.
Yeah,
Is that an indication that in the view of the court, or at least this prosecutorial office, much like Ireland, Sweden, and Spain declared earlier today, Palestine is a state?
Well, what's going on here is that the question of jurisdiction is at play. And for the court to intervene, the ICC to intervene in this case, one of the parties has to be a signatory to the Rome Statute.
And is Palestine a signatory to the Rome Statute, unlike the United States and Israel?
Yes, that's what the court has ruled.
Okay.
So please inform me, like, how is Palestine, how are the Palestinians contributing to world civilization? What are their great innovations, their breakthroughs? Like, where should we be emulating the Palestinians? Like, what are they doing that we should be envious of? Like, how are they setting a higher standard for civilization, for human freedom and flourishing? Like, what are they contributing and giving to the world? Now, on the other hand, if you say, look, they're in such desperate circumstances and have been for 80 years that you can't expect anything from them. So then you're really saying that there's no self-interested reason why people would care about the Palestinians unless they are Arab or Muslim, or they see the Palestinians as a tool or as a pet. Now, will Israel effectively be isolated? Well, Israel brings a lot to the table, right? Israel's done a lot of technological innovation, scientific innovation, medical innovation, military tactics innovation, military hardware innovation, right? So Israel is on the cutting edge of many parts of the world. And so technologically and scientifically and intellectually, all right, Israel punches way above its weight in terms of its influence. So what's the best way as an individual to not get isolated, to be able to bring something to the table, to be able to give something, to be able to offer something? All right. If you can contribute to other people, then other people are incentivized to maintain good relations with you. And so Israel can contribute a lot to other nations. And so it should take care with its reputation. It should do absolutely everything it can to conduct its war in the most scrupulous fashion possible. It should do everything it can to maintain good relations with other people, just like as individuals, we should try to have the best possible relations with everyone. Israel should try to have the best possible relations with every other nation state. The United States should try to have the best possible relations with every other nation state. And scrutiny and accurate criticism, all right, it makes us all better. It makes Israel better. Israel brings a lot to the table. And so while it should take care with its reputation and it should take care with this growing threat of isolation, it's not like it's completely helpless here. It's not like the Jews are some pathetic people who have no history of contributing anything to the world.
That they joined in 2015. That's the basic finding here.
Therefore, the court has jurisdiction over crimes committed on their property and against their people.
Exactly. That's what's...
Yeah, the court has jurisdiction. Yeah, but does it have the power to enforce? And, oh no, Josh Randall, I'm in tremendous pain, bro. I hurt my back landscaping. Ooh, I remember I had really wrecked my back. It was 13 years ago. So I had this romantic interlude. And my girlfriend at the time was about 5'2", So I picked her up, and like her legs were wrapped around me, and I was just kind of holding her at my waist. But then I made the mistake, like swaying back and forth. That just wrenched my back. So if you're carrying heavy weight, don't sway your back and forth. It can really wrench you. And my spine, my back was so awful that when I went to the doctor's office, they like brought other people in to see how completely whacked it was. It was the worst. But there was one time when chiropractic adjustment like took care of the problem, and I was fine. Didn't have to go back for further chiropractic, and I just learned a lesson. Don't sway around when you're carrying things in front of you.
What's going on here, and that's why Khan paid so much attention to this issue. If I can make one other quick point, Karim Khan is a very clever and forceful individual. And you want to understand that what he did here was he convened a panel of 6 legal experts. These are experts in international law, and 2 academic experts to look over all of the evidence and help him sort through that evidence and help him reach a conclusion. They all agree unanimously with him. They wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times, the 6 legal experts did, saying they agree unanimously with what Khan is doing. And furthermore, they issued a lengthy report.
Yeah, that is a very savvy way. So this is what Khan is doing right. All right, he's a savvy political player. If you're going to go out on a limb, like bring the relevant experts with you, right? You are much safer when you're surrounded by other relevant experts.
That lays out in detail the basis of the ICC's charges against the Israelis, or I should say against Netanyahu and Gallant. So this gives Khan lots of support. It makes it look like it's not one individual, this prosecutor, taking aim at the Israelis. He has the support of 6 distinguished international lawyers.
Were you surprised that 3 Hamas leaders were also named, particularly the third one in the list of the names? And I'm sorry, I don't have the name in front of me. You may know who it is. He's a longtime friend of our friend and colleague, Alistair Crook, and he is the chief negotiator for Hamas, who flies between Doha and Cairo, transporting the negotiation methods and efforts, which I guess he can no longer do if an arrest warrant is out for him.
Yeah, well, once the arrest warrant is granted, that will be true. For the time being, he can move around. His name is Ismail Hania, and I was surprised that they included him. But I think what's going on here is surely Khan understood that if he went after Israel, he had to go after Hamas as well. And if you're going to go after 2 Israeli leaders, it makes sense to go after 3 Palestinian leaders. So nobody can say that you're favoring.
It's amazing when you import the Middle East, you become the Middle East, right? You import a lot of Nigerians, you'll become a little bit more like those particular Nigerians and the quality of the civilization that they created back in Nigeria. You import Israelis and Muslims, all right? They're going to bring with you the problems that they were fleeing from in the Middle East. So Europe and the United States have both imported a huge number of Muslims, right? The United States, since 9/11, has imported like twice the number of Muslims that it had previously imported in its 240 years of existence. And so the demographics have changed in a massive, pro-Israel way, and in a pro-Islamic way. And as a result, like, politics is changing.
It's too comfortable. You're not living, you're dying. Modern America has gotten complacent. We sit in climate-controlled boxes all day. Then we drive home in a climate-controlled box on wheels to another climate-controlled box. We don't hunt or harvest. We have seamless drop dinner off, and we eat it on a cushioned recliner on front of TV. We've confused comfort with happiness. The heart of the human experience has always been about perseverance. You try, fail, get back up, and try again. You do hard things because it's rewarding. You don't have to go out in the woods and grapple with a grizzly, but a certain level of discomfort can drastically change your life for the better. Run fast, lift heavy, learn a language, give a speech, expose yourself to extreme heat and cold. Adversity shocks the system, makes us sharper, gives us a purpose and discipline. So let's get uncomfortable together. Michael Easter knows the importance of challenging yourself. He survived Alaska's most remote backcountry and wrote the book, The Comfort Crisis. He joins us now. All right, Michael, tell us what it means to be uncomfortable. How can we be as uncomfortable as we?
So, yeah, you think differently when you're outside as opposed to when you're inside. You think differently when you're moving as opposed to when you are stationary. You think differently when you're sitting as opposed to lying down, as opposed to standing up. You think differently when you're around other people. But the most important way you can challenge yourself is by growing your relationship with your family, your extended family, your friends, and your community, right? I think that's all the challenge that one absolutely must grapple with. Back to Mearsheimer.
Hamas over Israel. So that, I think, explains what's going on here. I just want to make another point, because it's very important to understand this. I read the report very carefully, and I read this is the report of the 6 experts, and I also read Khan's statement. And he makes it unequivocally clear that he is conducting ongoing investigations, and those ongoing investigations include what is going on in the West Bank. And I think if you read the documentation carefully, there's every reason to believe that this is not going to stop with Netanyahu and Gallant, that there are going to be a number of other Israelis who are singled out. And I believe.
So who enforces the International Criminal Court? All right, several European nations, but they don't really have large armies behind them. The United States is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court, but it can definitely make your life less convenient, right? There'll be all sorts of nations that you cannot travel to or through if such an arrest warrant comes out for you.
Believe it's not going to be for what's simply happening in Gaza, but what's happening in the West Bank as well. And my view is that once Khan opened this door, once he opened Pandora's box, there's no telling where this is going to stop. And the reason I say that is the evidence is overwhelming that Israel has been committing serious war crimes.
That of course is true. However, under the rules of the court, wouldn't Benjamin Netanyahu need to be physically present in the court in order for them to try him? In other words, if he stays out of countries where the arrest...
That's the best way to incentivize people to behave badly, put them under pressure, put them under threat, make them feel like they are fighting for their life. And Laponius, bro, your messages are not being censored. They're just flowing across my screen like a river of righteousness. So have no fear, bro. Elon Musk's Twitter X is not censoring you, man. You are part of the community. Deep State wants to stop me from spreading my super pro-human message. No, bro, it's flowing across my stream. You are within the circle of trust, bro. You are loved. But once you put Israel under strain, all right, Israel's had 100,000 of its citizens moved away from the north and south of the country, right? Because they're so concerned about all these rocket attacks and terror attacks. So you put a country under strain, they're going to fight back. All right, what nation would put up with being bombed, having rocket attacks, and would not fight back in an intense fashion? I don't know any nation that would just put up with a neighbor sending rockets and bombs into its territory.
Warrant can be executed for the rest of his life. He can avoid prosecution. Am I right?
Absolutely. And I would bet a lot of money he will never be prosecuted. But that's not the key issue here, whether he's prosecuted.
Right. The key issue, as I understand it, is the international effect of these prosecutions or these indictments and arrest warrants.
To put it in slightly different terms.
And we don't know in which direction this effect will go, right? This case could discredit the International Criminal Court and those who brought the case, or it could redound to their credit. And what would determine which direction this goes? Events, my dear boy, events. All right, if Israel gets sloppy, if Israel gets lazy, if Israel just succumbs to blind hatred and behaves badly, right, they will precipitate increasing social isolation, and the International Criminal Court will be seen as having done the righteous thing.
it's very important to create facts. What the Palestinians and their supporters have gotten very good at over the years is creating facts. And when facts are created by legitimate bodies like the ICJ and the ICC, they mean a lot. And what's happening here, and this is a huge problem for Israel, it cannot be underestimated, is that the narrative is changing in fundamental ways. And the narrative is changing in ways that make it almost impossible for Israel to counter. Again, the documentation in the case of the International Court of Justice and here with the International Criminal Court.
So as I stand back, I see many of the anti-Israel narratives getting discredited. Number one, that the ratio of killed combatants, all right, compared to killed civilians is far more impressive than any other example that we have with regard to this kind of urban warfare. Also, remember the Biden administration was making a huge deal, and all sorts of European nations were making a huge deal that Israel absolutely must not be allowed to go into Rafah, right? Hamas has headquartered in Rafah. And the United States, the Biden administration, all these European nations said, well, Israel absolutely should not go into Rafah. It would be a humanitarian crisis because they have no plan. They have no plan to deal with the civilians in Rafah. Well, Israel has gotten 1 million civilians out of Rafah, right? They've done what the United States, the Biden administration, various European countries said that they absolutely could not do. Well, they've done it. So many of the anti-Israel narratives just don't stand up.
Court, if you just sort of look at the documentation, it's voluminous. And this is a huge problem for Israel. And it all adds up to a serious indictment of that country that I believe will be a permanent stain on its reputation.
So we all know the definition of
You know what's more important than having a great reputation and being dead, right? It's better to be alive and have a mixed reputation. Right? Everyone will love you if you're dead, perhaps. But individuals and nations should put their emphasis on surviving and thriving. So if Israel comes out of this safer, stronger, more cohesive, right, more flourishing, right, more advanced, right, if they come out of this stronger and better off, right, then that will take care, Israel's international reputation will take care of itself. Right? Sometimes you have to do some very brutal things, and trying to put all these restrictions on how Israel goes after Hamas just lengthens the time of this conflict. Right? We're not going to have peace until there's a very clear victor.
genocide, an attempt to eradicate a group based on religion, ethnicity, or nationality. But the international condemnation of genocide also includes funding it. Can Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, Jacob Sullivan, Lloyd Austin also?
Yeah, absolutely absurd that the United States is funding Israel's war against Hamas to the tune of over $20 billion. Absolutely unnecessary. Right? Israel is completely capable of standing on its own 2 feet. Israel should stand on its own 2 feet. Right? We should not be subsidizing Israel. Right? Israel does not need American foreign aid. Cut it off.
Be in the prosecutor's crosshairs.
Oh, there's no question about it. There's just no question about it. They are complicitous. It's obvious that they're complicitous. Not only are we giving Israel material support and economic support, but we're protecting it at every turn diplomatically. All you have to do is look at how we responded to the ICC ruling the other day by Khan. I mean, it's quite clear that the United States is complicitous in what I would call a genocide.
Do you think sometimes that Israel is its own worst enemy?
There's no question about that. I think many Israelis understand that. And furthermore, I would go beyond that.
Yeah, well, what individual is not his own worst enemy? Right? Israel's fighting for its survival, and they've managed to do it by keeping civilian casualties to a minimum, as they've killed about 15,000 Hamas fighters, and they've killed about 20,000 civilians. Right? Who else has done better with a ratio of killed civilians to killed combatants?
And say that the Israel lobby in the United States, all these staunch defenders of Israel who go to great lengths to protect Israel, no matter what it does, are doing enormous harm to Israel. They like to argue that it's people like me, people like Steve Walt, people like Jeff Sachs, and so forth and so on, who are doing real damage to Israel. I think that's not the case at all. They're the ones who are doing great damage, and they do it by enabling Israel.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of enabling or subsidizing people who are perfectly capable of standing on their own 2 feet. So this is where I agree with Mearsheimer. And I agree with him in his observation that there's absolutely no parallel to the United States-Israel relationship. There are no other 2 nations that have had this sort of relationship in history. It's absolutely absurd that lobbyists for Israel don't have to register as lobbies for a foreign government, right? Whether there's peace in the Middle East or just a brutal war between Arabs and Israelis, it makes no difference to the well-being of the overwhelming majority of Americans. All right, if there was some kind of brutal conflict between Israel and the Palestinians that resulted in, 200 people dead on each side every day, it would make absolutely no difference to the quality of life of all those Americans who are not emotionally involved in the conflict. And so America should operate its foreign policy on the basis of what's good for Americans.
To behave in barbaric ways and foolish ways from a strategic point of view. Israel is in a giant mess. It shows no signs of getting out of this mess. And in fact, it looks like they're just digging deeper and deeper. And what is the lobby doing? The lobby is supporting them as they dig deeper and deeper. This is...
Yeah, so Dennis Prager talks about how he won't allow much criticism of Israel on his show, right? And he thinks that he's doing, Israel a big favor, but accurate criticism makes Israel better, it makes America better, it makes me better.
A pro-Israel approach? Not in my view.
Do you,
go ahead.
Do you think that there are 2 Israels? There's sort of the modern, liberal, high-tech, prosperous Israel, and then there's the theocracy, and the theocracy seems to be in control of the government now. Or do you have a different view?
Well, I think there is a lot of truth in that. And I think if you look at the big fight that took place in Israel before, and let me underline the word before October 7th, involving the judiciary, the Israeli Supreme Court, you saw that divide that you just...
So, yeah, why is Israel not so cuddly? Why is Israel not so liberal right now? Why is Israel not some giant shining beacon on a hill right now with regard to human rights? Because Israel's in desperate circumstances. And people in desperate circumstances, countries in desperate circumstances, armies in desperate circumstances they do desperate things. So Israel is acting out of desperation right now. And it's not always thinking clearly. It's not always making the best decisions, but it's fighting for its survival. It's fighting for its civilization. All right, you're probably wondering, what does Dennis Prager say about these things?
No. The other half, though, wrote something to the effect, gee, why did Dennis note that he's the second one from the left? Isn't it obvious?
And you're like, I did it. It wasn't me.
Talking about a photo he took with some Africans. He's the only white guy in the photo. And then he posted it on Facebook and said, look at me, I'm second from the left.
Hey. Someone else wrote that, right?
No, I wrote it.
Oh, you wrote it?
Yes, that's why I say it's one of the funniest things I ever did. Yes.
Oh my gosh! I thought somebody else wrote it for you. Sorry,
I wrote it, and I knew.
Oh.
and half the people go, "Gee, I don't know. Why would he write that?" What are you joking?
It's funny.
That's the point. Yes, exactly.
Well, clearly, I missed something. I have to say, sometimes I find that I don't always get very obvious jokes.
Which proves there's no relationship between getting jokes and intelligence.
All right, absolutely absurd point. There's a huge relationship between getting jokes and intelligence. It's just not a perfect relationship. We all have blind spots, and depending on a circumstance, all right, much of the time I am not in a mood for jokes, all right? If I've got deadlines bearing down on me, if I've got obligations bearing down on me, if I have to completely focus on dealing literally with challenges in front of me, then I'm not in a huge mood for jokes. And then also got my blind spots when it comes to some jokes I just don't get. But there's a huge relationship between getting jokes and intelligence, all right? The smarter you are, the quicker you'll detect a direction on a TV show, the quicker you'll detect a direction on a joke, right? All funny people are smart, right? Not all smart people are funny, but all funny people are smart. So Dennis Prager, like many other highly intelligent people, likes to crap on IQ and its predictive and explanatory value, but he's just completely wrong.
I think
are you aware that I just complimented you?
I am aware, but we should not make that even more of a thing because Dennis and Julie listeners are very aware of
It's awkward. All right. It's just, once you so overdo something like these constant compliments between Dennis and Julie, then it becomes off-putting even to those of us who enjoy the show. I like this show, but all the compliments going back and forth, it becomes a little nauseating.
The complimenting. I do sometimes get emails about it still.
I don't.
Let's just keep going and complimenting
No,
each other.
no. Okay, so this is actually not an unimportant point. They're wrong. They mean well. It's not a big deal. But
they're not wrong. It's a subjective experience. All right. If you are subjectively creeped out by all the compliments, all right, you're not wrong. That's just you. That's just your honest emotional reaction.
At a given point, anyone who does public work has to, and there's no perfect answer. You have to weigh what are they saying and what is your mind saying. I've learned a lot from listeners, a lot. And I've noted that on my radio show all of my career. At the same time, if you are guided by what they say, you won't have a show.
You have to know where you tend to make good decisions, all right? There are some areas in life where I don't make good decisions. So you have to know where you have a good, solid track record and where you have a track record of making bad decisions. So there are times when you want to be guided by the perspectives of others, and there are times you don't.
It's so true.
It will not be you.
It's so true.
So it's not natural for people who have the affection that we have for each other not to say on occasion, as we do privately, a positive thing to the other. Mm-hmm. So there's no, if one were to take the last 10 broadcasts, so that would make, let's say it's an hour and 15 minutes on average. So that's 10 hours plus 150 minutes is another 12 and a half hours of show. I would bet, and I never bet unless, because I don't have an instinct to gamble. So I only bet if I'm certain I'll win. And I would bet a serious amount of money that in the 12 and a half hours, there isn't more than 4 minutes of mutual complimenting.
I would agree. I actually think that's even too much.
That's yes, maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, a 1 second bullet through the head can end your life. All right, if the compliments are just so over the top and they just feel inappropriate and uncomfortable, right, it doesn't exactly matter for how many minutes they go on.
Maybe 1 minute. So I'd love to analyze what a person who writes in about that. Obviously, they thought about it enough to write in.
I can look up.
And not only that,
it's not primarily a rational, thought out reaction. It's just people have an emotional, social reaction based on their particular culture and their particular personality.
Think highly enough of us to obviously be watching it or listening to it. So these are not hostile people, obviously. But I treasure, the thing I most treasure in people is being real.
Yes.
Anyway, so I wanted to react.
No,
it's not a huge.
Being real is certainly not the thing I most treasure in people. I would say it's not even in my top three. The thing I most treasure in people is that they are decent. Second thing I most treasure in people is that they are brave. Third thing I most treasure in people is that they are clear. Fourth thing that I most treasure in people is that they are smart. Fifth thing I most treasure in people is that they're educated. Not necessarily formally educated, but just educated. Sixth, that they are pro-social. Right? There are all sorts of things that are more important to me than whether or not someone's authentic. Right? Much of the time, I don't want people to be authentic if being authentic leads them to be disgusting.
I agree. We don't have to spend. It's hard to do D&J and then find
don't
emails
right.
in the treasure trove. We don't need to spend too much time on it, but just occasionally. I mean, the vast majority of emails I get about it don't have to do.
No, of course not. I know.
Nothing
You send
to do
me
with
a lot of them.
But here's what's interesting. There are kind of two things. The first is, it's sort of like the missing tile syndrome, and I think this is true when you observe something in another person that maybe you don't like or is not your favorite thing about them. Sometimes you tend to really zero in on it. And I can imagine that those listeners of Dennis and Julie who may be aware of the complimenting, maybe sometimes they have heightened kind of ears for it, if that makes sense.
No question.
And I find that with just relationships in my own life. How many kids with their parents find an annoying thing that their parents do, and even if their parents don't do it that much, they zoom in on it and they make it seem bigger than it is. I think that's just true of human nature. And then the second thing I'll say on this is I love what you said a few moments ago about they're wrong. And you said something along the lines of like, if you listen.
So I'll give Dennis a compliment. He is strong, right? He has a strong internal compass. He is willing to stand up against a tremendous amount of criticism and pressure. Frequently, this is for the good. Frequently, it's for the bad. But yeah, Dennis is a man of tremendous inner strength.
To every single person, you won't have a show. Like, you need to do your show your own way. And I think there's something really, really true about that. Like, just generally in life, you have to, of course, listen to wise people giving you good advice or kind of pointing out if they think you're doing something wrong. But it is an equally important skill that a lot of people don't focus on, to know when to tune out the noise.
Exactly. And I fully acknowledge that a lot of, there's
Sorry.
noise.
Oh,
there
my
it is.
God.
Yeah. There it is.
I love
how
that.
Did you find that?
You wrote that. That
Yes,
is funny. You're very funny.
I agree. But that is one of my proudest moments of being funny. Dennis, second from right.
That is a hilarious. Oh my gosh. I love that photo. I've never seen you in short.
And in real life, Dennis is very funny. All right. He's got a subversive sense of humor. People just love being around him.
Are those?
And he's like an extrovert's extrovert, right? He will go to a party and he and his wife will be like among the last people to leave.
See, people, I want you all to know.
Yeah, socks and sandals.
He wears Birkenstocks.
They're actually Mephisto, but you're right.
And he drinks oat milk.
Yes.
I'm exposing you.
Correct. So, back to the serious part of this. There's no perfect answer. You have to take criticism. I'll tell you and listeners how seriously I take criticism. I seek it. I read attacks on me. For example, comments.
Yep.
And when they're on left-wing sites, they're all negative, and I still read them.
And I give Dennis a compliment for this, right? I give him credit for this. He really, truly does seek out critiques.
And you know why? There are a lot of reasons. I want to know what their perceptions are. How do they think? It's important to me to understand how people I totally differ with think. That's why I learned Russian to read Pravda, the Soviet newspaper. But there's another reason. On occasion, even people who loathe me may make a valid point.
Yes.
And so I'm thinking, wait a minute. Oh, I said that, or I did that, or I came across that way. I have to work on it. So so there's no perfect answer, except to say that you can't be swayed in either direction without using your faculty of reason. In other words, I can't be swayed by what others say, and I can't be swayed by self-confidence in my own opinion. I have to be swayed by what is the rational, I'm a big lover of reason, what is the rational approach to that question? That's it. That's the way it works.
Well, you should be persuaded or swayed by those who have expertise in a particular area, right? We're not all equally gifted with expertise, all right? Different people have different gifts. You want to listen to the people who know something more than you listen to people who don't know much.
That's right. And sometimes if people are right about one thing, that doesn't mean that they're entirely right. You know, you can kind of pick and choose from people.
And by the way, here's another addition to your rule. That's if somebody's wrong, it doesn't mean they're always wrong.
That's very, very true.
Yeah.
We tend.
I have found that the sharpest, most piercing criticisms I've received have been from some really often, rotten people who you just objectively think they're scum of the earth, but they have like an animal cunning about, what really motivates people. So I'm just thinking about many of the people I knew around the pornography industry. They had an animal cunning.
To in life think
always.
Yes, always and never. Someone once instructed me, they say, try to avoid in your speech and in your thought using those two words, always and never. But we tend to in life kind of succumb to binaries. And I'll give you an example of this. I remember when I was in college and I was discovering you and becoming conservative. What a thrilling time, by the way. I look back on that and
nice.
I had no idea how much my life was changing. But then when you're obviously looking retrospectively, it's a really thrilling story. But I remember talking to people and explaining my conservatism. And I would talk about Black Lives Matter and how horrible and corrupt it was, and how I thought that the policies that they were pushing for, namely defunding the police, were not helping but harming the Black community. I talked about the website when they said that they want to upend the Western prescribed notions of a nuclear family.
And this is a brave position to publicly criticize Black Lives Matter among Harvard-educated peers, as Julie does. All right, she graduated from Harvard. Right, that takes courage.
And the response that people gave to me was so interesting to me with regard to human nature. I had so many people say to me, you know, Julie, I actually agree with you that, you know, Black Lives, the Western prescribed notion of the nuclear family thing is bad. I agree with you that Black Lives Matter is taking it too far. But they said, I would rather be, you know, too supportive of BLM than not supportive of at all, in case there's some validity to the argument about, you know, police going after Black people.
No, that's just the excuse, right? There's the truth, and then there's the answer that people give. All right, when a movement is overwhelmingly given social approbation by those who have power in society, those who occupy the high ground of our leading institutions, then you would be quite foolhardy to recklessly criticize Black Lives Matter when those in power are, you know, all in for BLM.
People or mass incarceration. Their arguments were very binary. Like, I'd rather be too on the side of BLM than not on the side at all. And my response to them was,
who said this to you?
Classmates. When I would talk to them about my burgeoning conservatism.
It's a despicable organization.
Of course it is.
I just want to make that. It has nothing to do with supporting blacks. Nothing.
Of course.
Hating BLM, it's like saying, I hate the KKK. Oh, but you shouldn't hate the KKK because it means you're anti-white. No, I hate the KKK and I'm not anti-white.
So is there any other organization in the United States that can be clearly linked to the needless deaths of, over 20,000 people when you add up the increase in murder and the increase in traffic fatalities and the increase in pedestrian fatalities, or triggered by the activism of Black Lives Matter? I just can't think of another organization that has been so destructive over the past 10 years.
White. I hate BLM and I'm not anti-black.
I totally agree with you. I think Black Lives Matter is one of the most despicable organizations in the world. I hate Black Lives Matter. But at the time, to give them a little bit of credit, it was early in that kind of movement. This was before the embezzlement of money. To me, it was despicable from day one, and that was very obvious. But the point I'm trying to make is that I noticed this kind of binary in thinking. Like, I'm either totally with Black Lives Matter or I'm totally against it and think it has no validity.
If you're still waiting to buy gold, sitting on the sidelines, could cost you precious gains.
Example, this one you'll like. I went on your show when I was sophomore or junior, and I talked about feminism and how third wave feminism really harms women with regard to hookup culture, because it tells women that it's an empowering thing to take your clothes off and behave like men. And I remember a lot of my classmates said to me, you know, Julie, I agree with you, but I don't want to criticize feminism, because the same people who criticize feminism are the same people who want to repeal women's rights to vote. So again, it's like, why does it have to be this all or nothing thing?
Wait, they actually said that?
Yes.
Do you know anyone
of course
who
not.
wants to repeal the women's right to vote?
Of course not. It's absurd. But what I'm trying to highlight is that I don't know if it's particular to higher education. I think just generally, culturally, we don't have nuance. We succumb to these binary ways of thinking. It sounds so stupid to you because you think clearly, but a lot of people do think in those terms. They don't want to criticize feminism today because they think that it means they're criticizing feminism in its entirety.
This is a very good subject, actually. And I want to give you an example of where I would have some sympathy for the other side with regard to something I believe in strongly. So, for example, I think about this.
Okay, quickly on feminism. I just read in the London Review of Books a review of a new biography of Alex Comfort. Alex Comfort's the author of The Joy of Sex. And this professor says that The Joy of Sex now seems appallingly outdated in several ways. Some powerful sexist assumptions slunk into the text. For example, don't get yourself raped, i.e. don't deliberately excite a man you don't know well unless you mean to follow through. Right? If that advice is sexist, fine. It's very good advice. And Alex Comfort also reproduced racist stereotypes in The Joy of Sex. He would talk about Japanese-style sex, which was a mixture of violence and formality, and the negress position from behind, with the woman kneeling. So shocking that the joy of sex contained sexist assumptions.
More than a little. I think about it a fair amount. Israel is fighting to an existential battle. Vast numbers of people want to destroy Israel. If anyone who denies that is lying to themselves, and there's nothing I can do. They don't hide it.
Right.
Iran wants to destroy Israel, not win a war, destroy Israel. So does Hamas, so does Hezbollah.
They don't hide it at all.
Yeah, and Israel wants to destroy Hamas, right? Israel wants to destroy Hezbollah. Israel would like to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities, all right? Everybody wants to destroy their enemies.
Oh,
they don't hide it.
They don't need to hide it.
That's right. Okay. So in light of that, do I engage in a somewhat of some degree of suppression of criticism of Israel at this time? And the answer is yes.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yeah.
in other words, I'm doing what I wish everybody did, is I'm putting the
Yeah, and it's also good for him socially, all right? You don't benefit yourself when you criticize your own team. That doesn't go down well with your team.
shoe on the other foot. I'm
Yeah.
trying. So during World War II, fighting Hitler and the Japanese, I would have muted my critique of Britain or the United States. Because
I'm thinking now of those pictures, Abu Ghraib, of Americans mistreating Iraqi prisoners. And to me, it was a very minor story, but the New York Times splashed it on the front page something like 30 days running, which is absurd. I think the American news media just gave it far too much importance that it did not deserve. But I don't criticize the American news media for covering the story. I just think they vastly exaggerated its importance, right? In a time of war, any human organization is going to have some bad conduct.
the much larger war is so important and so moral. I can't right now weaken. It's not like, I'm the coach of a football team, and my team is losing. So do I really criticize? Yes, of course I do, because I want them to win. I mean, it's not a ball game. This is very serious stuff. So they would argue that racism against blacks is so great that criticizing BLM, when the larger battle is so moral. In other words, I am now trying to put my... Yes, I know, but they were wrong.
Of course, yes.
That's the difference.
Yes,
Israel is fighting an existential battle for its existence, which is redundant, but I want to make it clear. Whereas America is not systemically racist against black. That's a lie.
Yes.
And BLM doesn't do any good. It may have right suggestions like body cams on police, as you said, but who's against that?
Well, I'll give you a third example. I remember during COVID, a lot of people said, I would rather be too on the side of masks and vaccines and social distancing and lockdown
that's right.
than not on it at all. And again, I'm like, why does it have to be this binary? And again, I think.
Okay, so American college campuses are convulsed. We read in the news by the Israeli-Hamas conflict. In reality, I suspect that probably fewer than 5% of American college students are convulsed by this conflict. But New York Times got an article here. On campus, a new social litmus test, Zionist or not.
On campus, a new social litmus test, Zionist or not. This article is by Joseph Bernstein and read by an automated voice. Last fall, a Barnard College sophomore named Sophie Fisher reached out to her freshman year roommate to catch up over coffee. Her old friend's response was tepid, and Ms. Fisher wondered why. The two had been close enough that the roommate had come to the bar mitzvah of Ms. Fisher's brother. Several months later, the reason became clear. Over Instagram, Ms. Fisher's roommate wrote to her that they couldn't be friends anymore because she had been posting in support of Israel since the Hamas attacks of October 7th. In other words, she was a Zionist. Ms. Fisher thought she had been careful to avoid inflammatory posts.
Yeah, if you're a Zionist, if you're a nationalist, if you have a strong identity with your in-group, all right, then you will find out that the interests of your in-group are going to clash with the interests of other groups, because human desires are infinite while physical resources are quite limited. And we all tend to think of the strangers as disturbing. right? So anyone's got a religion different from your own, you're very likely to think of it as best disturbing, if not downright satanic. So when Jews advance their interests, when Jews have a Jewish state, well, the behavior of that Jewish state and the conflicts that it creates with other nations is going to come back with ramifications on supporters of Jewish nationalism, right? Having a Jewish state provides many benefits to Jews, but there's going to be a price paid, right? You pursue your group's interest, right? You ramp up your in-group identity. There's a price to be paid. There's a price to be paid for not having an in-group identity.
But the roommate, Ms. Fisher said, accused her of racism. Then she blocked Ms. Fisher. Around the
Yeah, if you have a strong in-group identity, you're an easy target for racism or bigotry or any other slur that is thrown around, right? So what's most important to you? Your in-group identity or the enemies of your in-group and their opinions of you?
At the same time, Ms. Fisher noticed something else strange. Her big, a mentor in her sorority, had stopped talking to her. When they were in the same room, Ms. Fisher said, the big wouldn't make eye contact with her. Ms. Fisher said that her big often posted about Students for Justice in Palestine, the campus group that Columbia had suspended in November for violating campus policies. Ms. Fisher remains in the sorority, but the two haven't spoken in months. She was supposed to be my big sister, she said. This spring, college campuses
So the feeling of betrayal is inevitable whenever you form any kind of connection. All right, so you develop a mentor or you become close with your roommate. Inevitably, you are going to feel betrayed because betrayal is the hyperbolic term we give for when we realize that other people have different priorities than what we expected. So we also have all sorts of identities within us that are latent, that they are just cruising along at a very low level, and then events happen like October 7, and identities that were latent become incredibly intense and therefore create conflict with others, right? You cannot form any kind of a bond with other people without precipitating an inevitable time when you will feel betrayed, because other people will always have different priorities at times than what we expect. But instead we use this hyperbolic term, betrayal.
Became the main stage for the American protest movement against Israel's 7-month-old war in Gaza. In April and May, dozens of pro-Palestinian encampments sprang up at universities around the country as students called for institutional divestment from, and at times, for the total dismantling of Israel. The protests have been characterized by heated rhetoric around the term Zionist, a word that typically refers to people who believe Jews have a right to a state in their ancestral homeland in present-day Israel, regardless of how they may feel about the war in Gaza. Many Palestinians and those who support them associate the word.
Right, the best book on this, I own a hard copy over here, right? Betrayals, the Unpredictability of Human Relations by an Italian scholar. It's been translated into English. We all encounter this universal experience of human interaction. Being betrayed will turn our lives upside down, leave us feeling suddenly frail and alone. But betrayal only arises out of sharing something of yourself with another. And so this is part of the great tragedy of human relations. At bottom, other people are unknowable, right? We're never going to get them completely right. They're never going to be like fully knowable by us.
With mass displacement during the 1948 war, triggered by the creation of Israel, as well as the killings over the past months of thousands of civilians and the decimation of Gaza. Through chants, statements, and sometimes physical obstruction, many protesters have made clear they don't want to share space with people they consider Zionists, and indeed, that they find the ideology unacceptable. At the University of California, Los Angeles, pro-Palestinian students blocked peers who identified themselves as Zionists from parts of campus.
All right, we all have different hero systems. All right, we all regard certain things as sacred. If you have any kind of in-group identity, that's likely to clash with the in-group's identities of others. And these conflicts of interest are just inevitable. And then people ladle onto these conflicts all sorts of, hyperbolic language like racist.
Given that a large majority of American Jews say caring about Israel is an important part of their Jewish identity, these instances of exclusion have led to a debate over whether the encampments are de facto anti-Semitic. Complicating matters, some of the most outspoken anti-Zionist protesters are Jewish. The litmus test. Some Jewish students on campus believe these dynamics amount to a kind of litmus test. If you support Palestine, you're in. If you support the existence of or aren't ready to denounce Israel, you're out. And they say this is not limited to pro-Palestine protests. It is, instead, merely the most pointed form of a new social pressure that has started to drip down from the public square onto the fabric of everyday campus life, seeping into spaces that would seem to have little to do with Middle East politics: club sports, casual friendships, dance troupes. Rabbi Jason Rubinstein, the incoming executive director of Harvard Hillel, said the more explicit litmus tests of the protests were making visible and physical something that's happening in a lot of places. This pressure, some students say, has forced them to choose between their belief in the right of the Jewish state to exist and full participation in campus social life. It is brought to bear not only on outwardly Zionist.
Yeah, we all tend to have multiple identities, right? Even committed Orthodox Jews have other identities. They may be in a profession. They may be entrepreneurs. They may have an interest in politics or culture, or they may strongly identify with their city or region or hobby. So we all have multiple identities, and these identities we will prioritize and change our priorities, right? You might be an intense Christian, and then you get to college and you find out the people you most want to hang out with are not going to hang out with you if you're an intense Christian. So we're always juggling the intensity of our identities.
Jews, for whom the choice is in some sense already made, but to Jews on campus who may be ambivalent about Israel. The mandate to take a stand on Israel Gaza, and for it to be seen as the right one, is often implicit, these students say, and sometimes it is pressed on them by people who aren't campus activists, but friends and mentors. And ultimate Frisbee coaches. This month, a senior at Northwestern University walked into the office of the school's Hillel executive director, Michael Simon, to tell him about a disturbing experience he'd just had. Days before, the senior, a team captain who...
So at any point, some difference between you and other parties may become a matter of life and death, right? You may enter the friend-enemy distinction, all right? And the enemy is he who rises into view and threatens the survival of your people. So it can be a matter of sports or music, culture, religion, racial identity, national identity.
Requested anonymity because he feared future professional consequences, had learned of a voluntary team meeting to discuss the war in Gaza. Beforehand, over a video call, the team's coach, Penelope Wu, shared with the captains a presentation that she planned to share at the meeting.
So overwhelmingly, Asians and Latinos are not participating much in these campus protests.
It raised and dismissed several potential objections to the idea of a club Frisbee team holding a meeting about Mideast politics. Assertions like, Lake Effect is just a sports team, and I'm not involved in this, were countered by the statements, sports are political, and neutrality is inherently supportive of the oppressor.
Right, sometimes there is no realm of the neutral, right? Sometimes you have to stand and deliver, you have to pick a side.
It also included an agenda item called Judaism versus Zionism, featuring material.
Right, anything that creates a friend-enemy distinction becomes political. That's the essence of politics, the friend-enemy distinction.
From Jewish Voice for Peace, an anti-Zionist Jewish activist group. The student said he had voiced an objection to the material because he thought it presented a one-sided view of the war and Zionism. The JVP material was later replaced with several paragraphs from the Wikipedia entry for Zionism. After the meeting, he said, the coach spoke to him. According to the student, who identifies as a liberal Zionist, Ms. Wu told him that she respected him as a Frisbee player, but that his pro-Israel attitude was wrong.
So most American Jews think that Zionism, to the extent they think about it, is just completely compatible with democracy and liberalism. But Zionism is not the exact same thing as democracy and liberalism, right? You can have a liberal and democratic approach to Zionism, but sometimes you have to choose, which do you put, greater loyalty? Is it your ideals of democracy? Is it your ideals of liberalism? Or do you primarily have a commitment to a concrete people, right? Do you always put principles first, or do you sometimes put the interests of your people first? Right? Do you put policy first, right? Or do you put your identity first?
And that it could be an obstacle in the future as he sought to make friends and get a job. The fear of long-term professional consequences has also been a theme among pro-Palestine protesters since the beginning of the war.
Yeah, we all have a relatively small number of people who we want to look good to, who we want to have a good reputation with. And we choose much of our approach to life and much of how we signal who we are and what we're committed to on the basis of staying connected with those who most matter to us.
Shortly after October 7th, a conservative watchdog group called Accuracy in Media hired billboard trucks to publicly shame college students they accused of anti-Israel sentiment, mobilizations that were widely seen as an attempt to harm these students' career prospects. In an email to the New York Times, Ms. Wu wrote that the student had mischaracterized or misremembered certain things I said. The captain didn't attend the meeting, instead writing a letter to his teammates describing his impression of the presentation. It will be a call for activism against Israel at all costs, and at least implicitly it will be a call for a dismantling and/or annihilation of the one Jewish state, he wrote in the letter.
So many American Jews have absolutely glorified in their unique identity, and they've wanted to reap all the benefits of their unique, special Jewish identity without paying any price for it whatsoever, right? They want to be fully American. They want all the opportunities that are available to them as Americans, and at the same time feel completely distinctive and special as Jews. But guess what? Those are two incompatible desires. You're going to have to give up one for the other. Great New York Times piece here on what's happening in the West Bank and these extremist Israeli Jewish settlers.
Gavir was Israel's national security minister and Smotrich was Israel's finance minister, charged additionally with overseeing much of the Israeli government's activities in the West Bank. In December 2022, a day before the new government was sworn in, Netanyahu issued a list of goals and priorities for his new cabinet, including a clear statement that the nationalistic ideology of his new allies was now the government's guiding star. The Jewish people, it said, have an exclusive and inalienable right to all parts of the land of Israel. 2 months after that, 2 Israeli settlers were murdered in an attack by Hamas gunmen.
So one of the key critiques of this New York Times article is that Israel has not lived up to its ideals. Okay, as opposed to which people has always lived up to its ideals, as opposed to which nation state has always lived up to its ideals, as opposed to, which individuals have always lived up to their ideals. And then they're shocked that Israel's government is going in a nationalist direction. Well, Zionism is Jewish nationalism, right? Why would people be surprised that a Jewish nationalist movement wants to continue along a nationalist direction? Right, back to Mearsheimer.
Described at play. And in fact, many people were talking about a possible civil war inside of Israel. But if you talk about foreign policy and you talk about policy towards the Palestinians, I believe that that divide that you described is not meaningful in any way. It's kind of like the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah, because Israelis feel like they're fighting for their very survival, for their way of life, and they are determined to strike back against the entity that slaughtered 1,200 of their citizens October 7th.
Democrats on foreign policy in this country. The Republicans and the Democrats are Tweedledee and Tweedledum. It doesn't matter whether Donald Trump gets reelected or Joe Biden gets reelected. This is not going to be any fundamental change in American foreign policy, in my opinion. In terms of domestic policy, there's a lot of difference between those two characters. There's no question about that. And I think that's what I'm saying about Israel. In terms of how the Israelis think about the occupied territories, how they think about a two-state solution, how they think about dealing with the Palestinians.
How Israelis think about these things is going to vary depending on the circumstance, right? The more desperate the circumstance, all right, the less empathy people have for outgroups. Right? The more you are under threat, the more that you are mourning the death of your in-group at the hands of an outgroup, the less likely you are to be kindly predisposed to the group that slaughtered your loved ones.
There's just not a lot of daylight between, let's call it, the center and the right.
Right. You have recently outlined in your brilliant lecture in Australia, which is posted on Judging Freedom, 4 probable scenarios for the end of the war in Gaza. And I would like to address each of those scenarios with you if I could. One is, it seems unlikely, but I shouldn't comment because you're the expert. Israel becomes a normal liberal democracy with equal votes and equal rights.
Yeah, and what other normal liberal democracies do you have in the Middle East? You have none. All right, the circumstances of the Middle East do not mitigate towards liberal democracies to the extent that you can afford them when you live in peace and affluence like the United States and other first world nations, right? The United States is protected by these giant oceans. It's the strongest power in the world, both militarily and economically. It can afford lots of liberal freedoms. When you're fighting for your survival, you can't afford as much liberalism.
For everybody who's there. We're not going to see that, are we?
No, just we want to make sure that we're clear that we're talking about Greater Israel here, which would mean Israel plus Gaza plus the West Bank.
Correct. From the river to the sea.
Yeah, as I said in that talk in Australia, from the river to the sea is a term that Israelis use as well as Palestinians. And basically, you're talking about Greater Israel. And what Hamas wants to do is turn Greater Israel into Greater Palestine. But they're talking about the same big piece of real estate. But the Israelis would never agree to turn that into a liberal democracy where every adult person got a vote, because it would.
Yeah, guess what? No nation state affords non-citizens the same rights that it affords to citizens. So there's absolutely nothing distinctive or unique about Israel's approach of not granting citizen rights to non-citizens.
Turn into a Palestinian state and no longer be a Jewish state. So that is not happening.
The two-state solution with a free, this is the second possible, not probable, possible outcome. I suppose anything's possible, but we're not in a court of law here. A two-state solution with a free and independent Palestine.
Well, the Israelis are adamantly opposed to that.
Is this what Tony Blinken wants, and Joe Biden says he wants?
Yes, but that's because they're delusional. It's not going to happen. I mean,
all right, 70% of the Palestinians supported the Hamas attack of October 7. You really think Israel is going to be A-okay with that and is going to be down with the state for these people?
Israelis call the tune here, not the Americans. And the Israelis have no interest in a two-state solution. And furthermore, after what happened on October 7th, regardless of what you think about the occupation, it is hard to imagine any Israeli leader agreeing to a two-state solution, because a two-state solution means that you get a viable Palestinian state, and that viable Palestinian state has the military means to defend itself. Of course, that.
And everywhere Palestinian immigrants have gone, they've destabilized the state. They've created massive chaos. I mean, are the Palestinians even capable of governing themselves in a peaceful manner? All right. I'm not aware of flourishing democracies where the average IQ is below 90. And so currently the average Palestinian IQ is about 82. So what are the flourishing nation states out there with abundant amounts of liberal democracy can you offer me where the average IQ is 82? There aren't any examples of that. You can only have a liberal democracy that functions if you've got an average IQ above 90. And the Palestinians are way below that, right? Even in the most ideal of circumstances, they are not capable of creating a flourishing liberal democracy, right? Which would be completely incompatible with Islam, right? Which Islamic states are flourishing liberal democracies, right? Which nation states where a majority of their citizens are Muslim are flourishing liberal democracies? There aren't any, right? Islam and such liberalism, Islam and Western liberal democracy are not compatible right now. Right, they may be compatible down the road in different circumstances, but we just don't have any examples where we can point to flourishing liberal Islamic democracies.
It would want the military means to defend itself since it lives next door to Israel. But from Israel's point of view, those defensive weapons that the Palestinians had would look offensive in nature. And given that you have organizations in the Palestinian world who want to take back all of the territory that Israel now controls, it's just very hard to imagine a situation where you get a two-state solution in my lifetime or your lifetime or in my children's lifetime.
The third and fourth are not unlike what we see now, an apartheid state with genocide.
Well, what you have now is an apartheid state. Let's leave the genocide aside. Israel is an apartheid.
And they're calling it an apartheid state because Israel does not afford non-citizens the same rights as citizens, right? It's kind of a bizarre formulation for apartheid, right? Israel was repeatedly attacked by multiple Arab nations when they fought back and unexpectedly captured a large amount of territory, right? They were stuck with millions of Palestinians who hated them.
State. And here we're talking about Greater Israel. And as I like to emphasize, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and B'Tselem, which is the largest human rights group inside of Israel itself, all three of these human rights organizations have issued lengthy reports making the case that Israel is an apartheid state. And I think if you read those reports, even if you just read the executive summaries of each of the three reports that these human rights groups have issued, you see that it is manifestly clear that this is an apartheid.
Oh, as opposed to like which flourishing states affording bountiful human rights would you point to in the Middle East to just so much more liberal than Israel? You can't point to any, right? The amount of rights that you can afford, the amount of liberalism that you can afford is going to depend on circumstance. Right? Life tends to be nasty, British, and short in the Middle East. Right? Compared to the other states in the Middle East, Israel affords its citizens, far greater rights and far more liberalism. Right, so you have to understand individuals and nation states within their particular context.
State.
But it is an apartheid state at the present time, post-October 7th, engaged in virulent ethnic cleansing, which has risen to the level of genocide and for which it has been condemned internationally.
Yeah, and the Arabs were trying to carry out their own ethnic cleansing, right, to drive the Jews out of the Jewish state. So you have a battle to the death between two groups right now.
And for which there is, as you said at the outset of this conversation and many other conversations and in many of your speeches and writings, more than ample evidence. The case is proven beyond a reasonable doubt and to a moral certainty that Israel is engaged in genocide.
I mean, Napolitano just simply doesn't know very much.
This gets to the fourth option. The fourth option is ethnic cleansing. And my argument is,
and why did we have so much peace in Europe at the end of World War II? Because there was massive ethnic cleansing, right? Germany was made more German. About 10 million Germans who had left Germany were pushed back into Germany, right? So whenever you've had widespread wars, such as what Israel has had to fight over the past 80 years, you've always had ethnic cleansing. So when you had civil rights laws, right? You had ethnic cleansing in the sense that you had different racial groups moving about the country, completely changing racial demographics in different parts of the country, right? People react to incentives.
The only way the Israelis can get out of apartheid is to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the West Bank. Because once...
As opposed to how lucky Israel would be to have 7 million people who hate it in its midst, right? Obviously, Israel is going to be a more coherent, more cohesive, higher trusting, stronger, more united, more prosperous, safer, more flourishing country without the presence of people in its midst who hate it. So yeah, that would mean a shift of Palestinians out of Greater Israel, right? It's obviously it seems to me to be in Israel's best interest. I'm wide open to arguments about how Israel is actually strengthened by the presence of millions of people who hate it and want it dead.
You cleanse the Palestinians, then you can turn Greater Israel into a liberal democracy because most of the Palestinians have been pushed out of Greater Israel. So it solves that problem. It also solves, it's worth noting, the Hamas problem. Israel is not going to defeat Hamas as long as the Palestinians remain in Gaza.
Yes, we're all locked in an iron cage together, Elliot Blatt, but you can create a part of your iron cage that only contains your group, your in-group, and you can erect walls and defenses against outsiders, and you will sleep a lot better, and you will have more trust with the people in your area of the iron cage if you are so lucky as to be able to erect walls against people who hate you and want you dead.
But if you ethnically cleanse Gaza, you solve the Hamas problem. So ethnic cleansing solves the Gaza problem, the Hamas problem.
Yes, he's saying a very harsh truth here, but ethnic cleansing solves a lot of problems for the Jewish state.
And it solves the apartheid problem. Now, what happened after October 7th is the Israelis saw an opportunity to cleanse Gaza, and they started bombing the place and trying to make it uninhabitable, trying to kill large numbers of Palestinians, all for the purposes of cleansing the Palestinians.
They weren't trying to kill large numbers of Palestinians, because if they wanted to do that, they were perfectly capable of doing that. Instead, they have kept down the number of dead Palestinian civilians compared to combatants to an all-time low. So if the anti-Israel critics are able to make the case that no, Israel has slaughtered civilians at a much higher rate than what is normal for this kind of urban warfare, then I'd like to see them present the evidence. But so far, none of them presented the evidence, right? There's a huge, well-funded anti-Israel contingent in the news media and among academics, right? And so you would think that they'd be able to put forward some empirical evidence that shows that no, Israel's conduct of urban warfare is particularly bloody compared to other urban warfares. But they never make that argument. Why do they never make that argument? Why do they never compare, right, combatant deaths and civilian deaths in Israel's war in Gaza with other types of brutal urban conflicts, right? If they had that argument, if they had those facts, if they had that empirical evidence, if they had that logic, if they had that reason, if they had that narrative on their side, they'd use it. But they never use it. They never bring up such empirical facts, all right, or logic or reason, because it's not on their side. They never use it. They cannot so far touch the Israeli argument that Israel has minimized civilian casualties compared to combatant casualties when compared with any other similar kind of brutal urban conflict.
From Gaza. But they failed. Nevertheless, they have continued to try to make that work. I believe they're still trying to make that work. This is why they're now starving the Palestinians. They're trying to push them into Egypt and trying to push them into Jordan, but it's not working. Ethnic cleansing is not working. So
how many nation states take great care to feed and look after and provide medical care for those groups that hate it and want them dead? Right? It's a pretty rare thing.
So you're back to the third strand, which is apartheid. And what's going to happen when the shooting finally stops is that Israel is going to remain an apartheid state. And that means the Palestinians are going to continue to resist. And we're going to have another October 7th or something like it down the road.
Do you think that October 7th and the events which have followed it have effectively destroyed the efforts of the American State Department to bring about a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
It certainly looks that way. The Saudis are insisting that they want a deal with Israel and with the United States. But in order to get a deal, there has to be serious movement. And I think they mean serious movement toward a two-state solution. And the Israelis have made it clear that as much as they'd love to have an Abraham Accord involving the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, they're not willing to make any concession on a two-state solution.
Well, Israel has achieved peace with its Sunni Arab neighboring states to a completely unpredicted and unexpected degree. So it's not highly unlikely that they won't reach ever increasing accommodations with Saudi Arabia. Effectively, Israel and Saudi Arabia are already allies. Effectively, Israel and Saudi Arabia have been allies for more than a decade, right? Effectively, Israel and the Sunni Arab states are allies, right? So there are pieces of paper, there are formalities, there are rhetorical presentations, but these rhetorical presentations are not the same thing as the facts on the ground. Facts on the ground, Israel and Saudi Arabia are already allies.